What's up, gamers? Dreamcastguy here, and this is my brutally honest review for Werewolf the Apocalypse Earthblood. I am extremely disappointed. This is a game that had some good trailers, some good teasers. It looked like it could have been a project with a lot of potential in it, but let me just say right up front, Werewolf the Apocalypse is the worst game I've played so far this year. It manages to squander some really good lore, the acting is terrible, and the gameplay is extremely basic. Now I want to try and break this game down and see the bad parts, and also highlight the small parts that are very, very good. Let's begin by talking with the combat. So, Werewolf the Apocalypse originally started off as a tabletop RPG, a pen and paper game where you'd actually explore, sneak around, and try and take down some evil corporations, which typically were like oil rigs, deforestation. I mean, you guys are kind of like hippie werewolves. You live in the woods with your friends, and you try and stop all sorts of these big evil conglomerates. Well, the way this kind of unfolds in the game itself is by being a mix of stealth and flat-out classic combat. So when you go into this, typically every single area is a confined room. There will be like 6 guards in a row, and you have to try and find a way to sneak around as a tiny little wolf and tactically take them down one by one without being spotted by the guards or the cameras. And you do this about 500 times in a row. This is pretty much the entire game. But if for some reason you do get spotted, if somebody does manage to call out, "Oh my god, there's a 90-pound wolf right there," well then in that case, combat breaks loose. Now here's where the game I feel like tries to be a bit more complex, because this is the one part that did kind of feel good. The gory, just visceralness of ripping people to shreds. Werewolves in this universe are extremely strong. Like, you are the size of a freaking tank, and you can do things like uppercut people, do strong attacks, fast attacks, but there is additionally some fighting stances. You can do what's called the agile stance, which makes you very, very quick, or you can do the more standard combat stance where you stand up on your hind legs and do way stronger attacks, but you can't run. Now the reason this is so bad, despite the fact that it may look at times appealing, is because you end up just repeating this exact same sequence again and again and again throughout the entire game. There is absolutely no variety, there's no added depth, you don't ever get like werewolf magic. Like, straight up, the way you win the very first fight in the game, you can use in every single fight. But the big problem with this is that I wish that the stealth was a bigger element to this. Essentially the way this works is that every single encounter is exactly the same. Typically they're telling you to like sneak into a room and try and hack a panel and stuff, but you can use your crossbow to stun people, but really the best course of action is to choke a couple people and then immediately just wolf out and kill everybody. And it's just so easy. Like, most of the people for the entire majority of this game, you're just fighting against average guys, like random dudes with body armor, and you eat them incredibly easily, obviously, right? But as the game goes on, you start to learn about Earthblood. You get a chance to start to experience what's going on at this company, which is basically, it's like Amazon decided to make super soldiers. It's people that start being incredibly buff, they're resistant to your claw attacks, and later on, towards the last half of the game, in the last final sections, you start to see these people that have these super abilities, people that are kind of like evil werewolves, I guess I say, because they start to have their own strengths and weaknesses and special abilities that kind of rival your own. And my problem with this is that towards the very, very last chapters, which I don't want to show you in depth because that would be a spoiler, and I try not to spoil things, there are a couple monsters that are introduced in the final chapters of this game that are very cool to me and actually change things up. At the very end, they start to try and give you an actual challenge and make things feel more complex and rewarding. And if they'd taken every kind of monster and just sprinkled them throughout the entire game, it would have been better for it. The fact that I can so easily just do the same exact series of attacks, the series of grabs, and just take down people from the very beginning to the very end is a huge letdown. The biggest problem with this game, it never gets hard. Like, never once does this game start to toy with the idea of actual difficulty. It feels like they're trying to be afraid of making it where your werewolf will feel weak. And so because of it, every single scenario is sneak in, rage out, rip everybody to pieces, go to the next room. But here's the extra problem I have, which is that throughout this game, there is no variety. Like, for example, I'm sure you can't even tell, but I've edited together different sections of the game. Times where I'm out in the desert, times where I'm in these evil facilities at night, and you can't really tell. Like, straight straight up, everything looks so identical with this stone backdrop that the only real difference from one area to the next is a slight lighting difference, just a shade of sun or moon, and this again is such a huge letdown. I do want to talk about something in this game that I did find interesting, because one of the things that happens is obviously because you are supposed to be sneaking around, there isn't a lot of like experience points based on combat. Instead, you get all your experience points by story progression, by hitting the next checkpoint, by surpassing the next mech area or whatever. But one of the extra ways you can get a bunch of extra XP is by finding spirits of energy. So while you're going around, you're sneaking, you can find these little tiny shrines that are like nature relics, and by praying to them, they bless you with spirit energy, which is basically used in the talent trees. Now, part of the reason I like this is because the talent trees do kind of give you some extra skills. They allow you to do like a slam attack that creates a shockwave, or you can get a special rage mode that lets you actually do like a series of attacks. But part of the reason I really enjoyed this is that it truly evokes the lore. Like, the biggest problem with this game is the fact that Werewolf the Apocalypse is an amazing tabletop RPG. They have like 40 years of lore that they could have gone into. They could have actually taken the story into so many interesting directions, despite the fact that it is just sneak into a base and shred a couple employees up. And the reason this drives me nuts is because the original cutscene, the opening cutscene of this game, is amazing. It shows the fact that there is these three separate factions of our world. There's the Wild, the Weaver, and the Worm. And this is basically the style of life, the style of order, and the existence of destruction, fire. The fact that fire needs to burn down a forest in order for new trees to grow. I like the idea that there is this constant cycle of life and death, and werewolves definitely fit into this system. They try and worship the act of creation and order, and they fight against the increasing essence of destruction. This gorgeous opening cutscene definitely implies that we would be doing something to try and fit into this. We'd be doing our own part to try and play a role in the cycle of life and death, but we just don't. Like, this is just a cheap, little, tiny, useless game at times where you're going to be hacking and slashing. It feels like a PlayStation 2 game at times because it just has such a repetitive essence at the heart of it. It manages to just constantly do the same things again and again and hope that you'll stay entertained. Now let's talk about the most laughably bad part to wrap up, which is the fact that there is a surprising amount of dialogue in this. Whenever you go back to base, and for some reason the base is just right next to the enemies, like you can just straight up walk from one zone to the other, while you're hanging out with your werewolf buddies or the humans that are friends with you, there's a lot of dialogue options. There's actually trees that allow you to go through and talk to different methodologies, seeking information, asking questions, or sometimes just figuring out about your next mission. The dialogue is horrendously bad. Now, as you can see, the character models themselves are atrocious, but when you're playing this game, every single line of dialogue, everything that people just speak is weird. Everybody talks like such a robot, which is of course ironic because we're supposed to be the creatures of nature, and yet we do not speak naturally at all. Everybody you encounter is like a sock puppet. Hello, Cahal, it is nice to see you, but then they just kind of just set you off on your missions. It's so disappointing that they decided to base this on Werewolf the Apocalypse specifically. This is a game that has so much rich history, so much incredibly well-developed lore, and they decided to turn it into this. If you're wondering if this is a game that's worth the price, it absolutely is not. But if you're looking for a game to try and sell when you see this for $5 in a month or two, maybe it's worth that. I beat everything in this game. I did every side quest, I did every single shortcut, I did every single thing to defeat every single boss for 100% completion in about 7 hours. This game is short, but it's definitely not sweet. Okay, so we've heard some good and some bad, but let's go to the ratings board and put a big number on it. I am giving Werewolf the Apocalypse Earthblood a 5 out of 10. Thanks so much for watching, gamers. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already. But do me the biggest favor of all, and keep dreaming. It was kind of interesting to go and be a werewolf. It was kind of nice to just shred people, but this is definitely one of those games that has a very, very strong opening 90 minutes and then a long, very boring game after that. And I hate to say boring because that's the greatest insult, but yeah, for most of this game, I was downright bored.